The film opens with Tom, the proprietor of a second-hand bookstore located in New York City. On this particular day, a young PhD student named Sandra enters the shop in search of the ideal birthday present for a professor. Her enthusiasm for literature captures the attention of Tom, the charismatic owner, who is also a passionate bibliophile and feels compelled to engage her in conversation. As he rings up her purchase, Tom takes the opportunity to invite Sandra out on a date. However, she politely declines with a warm smile, expressing her contentment with being single. Respecting her choice, Tom attempts to process her payment, only to find her card repeatedly declined, resulting in Sandra leaving without the book. In a generous act, he offers her the book as a gift, encouraging her to return and settle the payment at her convenience. Later that evening, as Tom is preparing to close the store, Sandra returns to pay for the book and ultimately agrees to go on a date with him. They enjoy a delightful evening at a Japanese restaurant, where Tom shares that he once aspired to be a writer but abandoned his dreams following his mother's passing and his struggles with depression, finding refuge instead within the bookstore's walls. Sandra's background is equally poignant. After losing their parents, she and her brother were shuffled between various foster families. Her love for literature blossomed when she discovered the novel Jane Eyre among the books of one of her foster parents. The striking similarity between the two avid readers' personalities ignites a romantic narrative that unfolds until a sudden shift occurs within a matter of days. Tom's visit to Sandra's residence takes an unforeseen turn when they are abruptly disturbed by a persistent knocking at the door one evening. Sandra identifies the visitor as her brother Jason, who is in urgent need of funds to resolve a drug-related debt. She further discloses to Tom the unfortunate circumstances surrounding Jason's experiences in foster care, revealing that some of the homes he was placed in were nothing short of traumatic, shaping him into the individual he is today. Despite witnessing her brother's aggressive demeanor, Tom continues his relationship with Sandra, providing her with comfort during her times of need. Several weeks have passed since their initial date, yet their connection remains as thrilling as ever. One evening, Tom confides in Sandra about his strained relationship with his father, who views him as a disappointment. Additionally, his father's new marriage creates an uncomfortable living situation for Tom. Everything appears to be going smoothly until one day, Tom arrives at Sandra's home to find her in distress, alone in her room. It is revealed that her brother is in grave danger, having been viciously assaulted by a group of thugs to whom he owes money. They have issued a threat to return and harm him further if he does not repay the debt within 4 days. Tom fears that the impending threat from the thugs cannot be averted unless they settle the debt. However, with the amount totaling $350,000, Sandra believes that paying it off is not a feasible solution. Tom then discloses that his father's hedge fund has the necessary funds, and he offers his assistance. Nevertheless, Sandra hesitates to accept such a substantial sum from someone she barely knows. In Tom's view, the most significant aspect of his life is his deep affection for Sandra, and he is determined to safeguard her at all costs. With no alternatives remaining, Sandra resolves to accept the offer, promising to repay the amount eventually, regardless of how long it may take. After assuring Tom that they will meet later that evening, Sandra leaves to arrange the funds. That evening, Tom awaits Sandra at the restaurant where they shared their first date, but she fails to arrive. In fact, she vanishes from her apartment, never to return, leaving Tom in a state of distress. The narrative then shifts to Sandra, revealing her true identity. The film flashes back to a few weeks prior, when Sandra visited her parole officer at a bar before meeting Tom. It becomes evident that the seemingly sweet and innocent Sandra is actually a parolee with an extensive criminal background. The parole officer questions Sandra about her employment, to which she claims to work at Starbucks. However, her deception quickly unravels when the perceptive officer discovers that she has not been to work in over a month. Since being terminated from her job constitutes a violation of her parole agreement, and she admits to having smoked marijuana the previous night, the officer is compelled to arrest her. At that moment, a wealthy man named Max approaches and attempts to bribe the officer to release Sandra. He offers $400 along with his Rolex, but the female officer firmly declines the bribe. As Max departs, the officer realizes she has made a significant error in rejecting such a substantial sum. She invites him to discuss the matter further, and ultimately, Max agrees to give his Rolex to the officer, leaving Sandra bewildered. Once the officer happily leaves with her watch, Max reveals that it was merely a replica he used to execute his scheme. He then offers Sandra $1,000 as her share, successfully convincing her to listen to his proposal. He takes her to an apartment and offers her a place to stay, contingent upon her agreement to work for him. The next morning, Sandra awakens to find Max preparing breakfast in the kitchen. As they engage in conversation about movies, he gives her the impression that he is a fan of Titanic, while in reality, he does not watch films at all. This is the deception they will employ to extract money from others. As a con artist, Sandra will attract wealthy men by embodying the traits they desire in a partner. It falls upon Max to collect all pertinent information about their target, facilitating Sandra's execution of the scheme. However, contrary to Max's expectations, he discovers that Sandra spends the night indulging in marijuana rather than concentrating on her strategy. In a fit of anger, he expels her from the apartment and from their intricate plan. When Sandra pleads for forgiveness, Max ultimately consents to her return, provided she remains sober throughout the operation. The next day presents a significant workload for Sandra, as she must learn and memorize Tom's preferred literature, quotes, and authors. She not only needs to comprehend Tom's interests but also to construct an entirely new identity for herself. Every detail she shared with Tom, from her educational background to her family history, was a complete fabrication. Mastering each line required her days of intensive study and cognitive enhancement techniques to absorb every nuance, all in the pursuit of winning Tom's affection. After several days of diligent effort, Max takes Sandra out for dinner and instructs her to charm the men seated at the bar. As a seasoned professional, Sandra requires only a few moments to employ her seductive tactics to gain access to the man's room. However, just as they are on the verge of intimacy, Max bursts into the room, adopting the role of Sandra's former boyfriend and accusing her of betrayal. Urging the men to remain calm, Sandra instructs him to wait in the lobby for a brief period. As the man exits in haste, Max reveals his true identity and begins searching for cash or other valuables. Upon realizing that Sandra has honed her conning abilities, Max initiates the elaborate scheme they have been devising for weeks. The narrative then shifts to Max, returning to the day prior to his collaboration with Sandra. He pays a visit to his mother in an opulent apartment, where it is revealed that Max's mother, Madeline, has wed a man named Richard, a renowned billionaire who is deeply devoted to her and cannot tolerate anyone who causes her distress. Despite this, Max seizes every chance to irritate his mother by referring to Richard as old. Appearing intoxicated and confrontational, Max persuades Madeline to permit him to stay at Richard's apartment for a short while. The following day, upon returning home, Madeline and Richard discover that Max has been apprehended for attempting to procure drugs from an undercover officer. In an effort to mitigate the situation, Richard offers $1,000 to the undercover officer. However, Madeline realizes that Max had called a fake police officer on himself in an attempt to extort money from Richard, leading both Max and his friend to confess their scheme. In a moment of anger, Madeline slaps Max for consistently embarrassing her in front of Richard and insists that he vacate the apartment. Nevertheless, she visits him the next day to apologize, only to unveil an unexpected truth. It is revealed that Madeline is actually Max's girlfriend, collaborating with him to deceive the billionaire Richard. She informs Max that Richard wishes to meet him in his office to discuss their predicament. The next day, Max arrives at the office just as Richard has completed a medical examination. To their astonishment, they encounter Tom, who is revealed to be Richard's son and has yet to meet Sandra. Richard expresses his frustrations with Tom, lamenting that he is disappointed with his son for showing little interest in the family business following his mother's passing. Instead of seeking extravagant possessions, the only heir of a business magnate has requested a bookstore, desiring to earn a living through his passion. After sharing his concerns, Richard ultimately addresses the matter at hand. He informs Max that his disrespectful conduct towards his mother has compelled him to offer a substantial sum of money in exchange for Max's withdrawal from Madeline's life. For a monthly sum of $60,000 and a year's salary paid in advance, Max consents to sever ties with his so-called mother, vowing never to return. With newfound wealth, he enters the bar where his accomplices, Madeline and the impersonating officer, await eagerly to celebrate the success of their scheme. Their next objective is to flee the city, but Madeline must first retrieve some belongings from her apartment. However, as dawn breaks, Max contacts Madeline, only to discover that she is unwilling to escape with him. Having captured Richard's affection, she now enjoys access to his vast fortune, which far exceeds what Max receives from Richard. In a further act of betrayal, Madeline has also alerted the authorities about Max feeling deceived and trapped. Max abruptly ends the call, his heart pounding with anxiety as he hurriedly seeks an escape. The narrative then shifts to Madeline. Weeks later, Richard passes away after a prolonged illness. It becomes evident that her tears are feigned as she steps out of her room to join others. Richard's attorney subsequently informs Madeline and Tom that Richard has bequeathed his properties, assets, shares, stocks, and a staggering $9.2 billion solely to Madeline. Due to Richard's reservations about Tom following the incident with Sandra, Tom is granted only a trust that permits him to maintain his bookstore. He is appointed chairman of Richard's foundation, while Madeline assumes the role of trustee. To create the illusion of disinterest in the inheritance, Madeline repeatedly apologizes to Tom, yet internally, she is thrilled at the prospect of becoming the sole proprietor of the entire estate. Tom appears to trust his stepmother completely, harboring no doubts about her intentions. With her newfound affluence, Madeline indulges in a luxurious lifestyle, frequenting upscale boutiques. This continues until one day, Tom arrives with inquiries regarding Sandra's case. He has enlisted Braddock, a family friend, to assist him in locating the woman responsible for the theft. Braddock, with the information at his disposal, believes that Sandra cannot execute such a complex con by herself, indicating the involvement of additional individuals in this intricate plot. The next day, Madeline attempts to dissuade Tom from continuing his pursuit of Sandra's case. By asserting that Tom is more interested in meeting Sandra than in the stolen money, Madeline successfully manipulates him into dismissing concerns about her character. Although Tom has instructed his men to cease their search for Sandra, they inadvertently follow a final lead and manage to locate her. Upon discovering her in a distressed state in their apartment, Tom concludes that Sandra was indeed not acting independently. It is revealed that her accomplice, known to us as Max, has betrayed her, leaving her in a vulnerable position. According to Sandra, Max had informed her about Tom and had some connection to Tom's family. As Sandra reflects on her choices, Tom feels compelled to allow her to remain until she recovers. Madeline, however, objects, arguing that they cannot trust someone with a history of addiction, but Tom remains steadfast in his decision. To confront Sandra, Madeline visits her in her room, where it becomes apparent that Sandra is well informed about Madeline. Courtesy of Max eager to rectify her past mistakes, Sandra expresses her willingness to confess to Madeline's wrongdoings. When Madeline proposes a deal, Sandra agrees to maintain her disguise, provided that Madeline brings her the person who betrayed her. Although Madeline is unaware of Max's whereabouts, she finds herself compelled to reach out to him repeatedly. After several tense days of awaiting a response to her voicemails, Madeline finally manages to contact Max, who consents to assist her once more. Under the pretense of taking Sandra for a walk, Madeline leads her out of the apartment to orchestrate a meeting with Max. Sandra is incensed to confront the men who deceived her, but before she can demand an apology, two cars arrive unexpectedly. It is revealed that Tom and his men are present, and Tom finally witnesses the true nature of his stepmother. Tom and Braddock arrive to validate Tom's suspicions regarding the collaboration of the three individuals. Rather than expressing remorse for her actions, Madeline asserts that they are powerless to act, as all of Richard's assets now belong to her. During a heated confrontation, Tom unexpectedly seizes Braddock's firearm, intending to shoot Madeline for the destruction she has caused in his life. Sandra intervenes to prevent this act, but Madeline is then struck by the gun, picks it up, and threatens everyone present. In a moment of frustration, Tom takes the pistol from Madeline and forces her to pull the trigger, leading to his own death. Tom's associates are convinced that Madeline is responsible for the murder and are preparing to inform the authorities. In a state of panic, Madeline fears a lifetime in prison and hastily contacts her lawyer, arranging for her inheritance to be transferred to Richard's foundation, thereby securing her escape from this predicament. Braddock then escorts the trio, with Sandra boarding the plane alongside Madeline and Max. Madeline reminds Max that she will maintain control over the funds, as Tom is deceased and she serves as the trustee of Richard's foundation. Upon hearing them discuss finances so soon after Tom's death, Sandra excuses herself to the restroom. Madeline and Max grow suspicious when they observe that the stain on Madeline's sleeve is not genuine, indicating that Tom is still alive. Madeline suspects Max may be involved, but he denies it, prompting her to realize that Sandra has been absent from the restroom for an extended period. Upon checking, she discovers that Sandra has vanished. The narrative then shifts to the final act, where the true nature of the plot is unveiled. It is revealed that Sandra has developed feelings for Tom, and following Richard's death, she chose to disclose all the plans she had orchestrated with Madeline and Max. With Sandra's help, Tom successfully assembled his own team, including Braddock and others, to execute the entire scheme with remarkable finesse. The meeting between Sandra and Max was prearranged, and utilizing the cunning techniques she had learned, Sandra successfully deceived both of her mentors. With Tom still alive, he continues to oversee the foundation and its finances. The film concludes with the con artists receiving their compensation for the scheme, assisting Tom in reclaiming his vast wealth, and allowing him to enjoy his quaint bookstore, free from the negativity that had previously surrounded him.